This manhwa begins with Eugene, a little girl who grew up as an orphan, having lost both her parents. She is currently struggling to become a full-time employee. While walking down the street, she saw a dog being walked by a wealthy man, and the sight made her stop and fall into her thoughts. Unfortunately, this was the very reason she was hit by a truck. What seemed like the end of her life turned into an unexpected twist as she found herself transmigrated into a captive game called the Golden Cage. The character she transmigrated into was a small girl with platinum hair, a side character destined to be killed by the prince in the early part of the game. Exhausted by her tough and hardworking life, she decided from the moment she met the prince that she would become his pet instead of the main female character. And so, with her ability to bark like a real dog, she successfully caught the prince's attention and was officially recruited to become the prince's dog. Eugene, now holding the title of the royal dog, finally experienced a comfortable and luxurious life like a real pet. However, another problem arose. The crazed prince from the original game, who always feared his dog might one day run away, was someone who cared too little. "What's wrong with you, my adorable Eugene?" Along with those words, he would just stand there, gently gazing at her with warm eyes. "Oh dear, should I pretend to run away?" Thus began a fierce struggle for Eugene to secure a truly comfortable and prosperous life as a pet. Although I'm not an animal, I am now the main character of this golden cage. To become the perfect protagonist according to the principle, today I will continue to escape. According to the principle, today she would have quickly jumped down from the wall. The master would only run after her, saying to come down quickly and continuing to apologize. But rather he would have to carry her down. And she was seething with feelings of betrayal and obsession. He would also have to say in a cold voice, "Put on this coat or you'll catch a cold." However, according to the principle, there was no scene of putting on a cloak, even though it was very warm. But if following the principle, she had to say she would run away today. Yet, after saying it, she felt so embarrassed. After all, this is just a game, and if you make the right choice, everything will follow the correct progression. But he apologized for feeling he had oppressed her too much and said she could go out tomorrow. However, she felt that this person wasn't speaking according to what was said in the game, so she had to return in frustration. Because she said she didn't like the golden cage, he said he would give her a water trove tomorrow. She didn't know where she went wrong, but since it was cold, they needed to go inside first to talk. Although she was caught today, she would never think this would crush her spirit. She would regain her freedom, yet she was still sitting in a warm room. According to the principle, being his pet would mean she would run away. The prince, brimming with mischievousness, would then stir up his possessive obsession from childhood. But why were his eyes so warm, making it hard for her to break free? Despite everything, they were not in an obsessive relationship to the point of slaughtering each other. She never hoped for that level of obsession, but the prince was always very attached to her. She was caught and tried to run away, but now she saw him smiling kindly at her. This male lead, she didn't understand what was wrong with him. While she struggled to escape, he spoke as if he enjoyed it. This scene was about him taking her away to confirm his feelings, and all the servants knew the two were angry with each other. They lay next to each other to sleep, but she pushed him away in disgust. He took her hand and bit it, but it wasn't as pretty as a red puppy paw, and there was no dog nose here. She didn't understand why, in principle, he didn't look as sad as in real life, so she was very angry. Unexpectedly, he pushed her down, and now she felt he was very handsome. This action was extremely ambiguous, and she was surprised at how the cruel tyrant prince had disappeared since then. Unexpectedly, these things were written into the report by our main female character, making the boss very angry and throwing the pile of papers at her. The atmosphere was cold and gloomy, and her colleague continued to berate her. After entering a private room, he laughed and said that she had worked very hard to contain the team leader's wrath. But she didn't want to do that and wanted to leave everything behind. Following the manager's instructions, she revised the draft, amended the comments into text, and attached additional documents. She waited for the old manager to speak directly, so she waited until now. But her colleague said that it didn't matter if she was about to leave. Then he said that the company would not hire female employees. Hearing this, she was very shocked because it came directly from the HR department. She would only be a contract employee and would have to leave after a short period. While he continued working there, she didn't necessarily need to cause outrage in this place. She didn't understand why she still had to endure this. These employees pretended to bully new employees. The team leader had a grumpy temperament, and the incompetent manager was utterly garbage. She tried to endure to the best of her ability, wanting to get a permanent employee card and become a true office worker. She wanted to do this to show her deceased parents, and now she felt so foolish. She didn't even think that the company was just exploiting employees and then discarding them. At this moment, she recalled the things she had drawn in the story about healthy snacks for dogs made from premium beef. This was the financial world of dogs, and people said that dogs would inherit the houses their owners owned. She felt so jealous because she couldn't even afford a small office in her life. Speaking of house hunting, could it be the beginning of searching for gifts once again? If she were reincarnated, she would also want to become a dog in a rich household. Just lying there and doing nothing, not having to think complex thoughts or try hard. She was burying her face in her phone playing a pet dog game, but carelessly she was hit by a car. She thought everything was truly over. But unexpectedly, her phone was accessing a special event in the game. Now she really didn't have to do anything, and when she opened her eyes, she was in an ancient cage filled with pet dogs. She was given a bowl of water, and looking into it, she saw that she had white hair. She quickly felt much better. The person in front of her had brown hair and blue eyes. First of all, the red ears indicated the main character of the game Golden Cage, whose name was Canis. She realized that the prince had not yet appeared because he was obsessed to the point of having to imprison her. The famous character was a madman in the game. At this moment, the person opposite asked why she was so calm. If it was the white-haired character next to the main character, this was clearly a side character abandoned by her parents. A side character not even mentioned by name, as she was killed by the prince right at the beginning in front of Canis as a punishment. Although that was just a character in this game, that prince was no ordinary person either. She truly thought she was in the game, and now wondered if she should give herself a nickname. She decided on the name Eugen because it wasn't hard to pronounce, so it should be fine. Canis thought the name was nice, and the two of them laughed and talked happily together. Canis wanted to hear her story of how she got here. Everyone here had shared their stories, and in this way, she could find a way to get out of this place. It was okay if she only remembered vaguely. Whatever she recalled, Canis immediately wanted to hear that story. This was the slave shop in the first episode, and Canis was trying to find a way to escape. As predicted, Canis was the main character, but Eugen didn't know much more than that at this moment. The main character had now appeared. If this was the slave shop, then when this person appeared, all the events would begin. That person was Prince Michael. He saw her sitting right in front of him and asked what this strange thing was. The two looked at each other. But Canis quickly lunged forward and growled in front of him. He only felt that this place had many strange things and asked the owner what that was. That's a little animal without an owner, belonging to the wolf breed. If you train it well, it will be very loyal and intelligent. The time for choice had come, and seeing Canis there to bare her teeth and bark at him, he found it very interesting. The end of the game was decided depending on his choice. This beautifully illustrated event would offer two choices for Canis's life. Ignored after the prince lost interest and left, she would be thrown out of the door as punishment for causing a commotion. Or, after barking, the final choice would also result in imprisonment. In reality, this was just a game with a bad ending, no matter which option was chosen. Participants in the game enjoyed collecting many different captivity endings, but the main character surely suffered in the pursuit of freedom. Having a life trapped in a golden cage without being able to do anything was truly pitiful. She also wished she could be reincarnated as a dog in such a wealthy family. But unexpectedly, she also barked, and the owner had to explain that it was actually a human. It would be crazy if it was something only the main character could do, but she had already died once, and failing again wouldn't be the worst. Never mind, she would decide everything her way. He said that her appearing before him not as a beast man was ridiculous. This was much more interesting, so it became his first choice. Now it was time for him to make a choice, and this prince only wanted to treat them like objects. It wouldn't be a bad idea to raise an ignorant golden dog, so she was quickly taken away. She could choose the events even if she wasn't the main character. She remembered all the necessary events for the ending, so there shouldn't be any problem. But she wasn't like Kanai's. She didn't need that illusory freedom. Even when she was in Korea, she was a slave to capitalism, and the important thing now was to warm her stomach. If she were to become a slave now, she would have to become a slave in a wealthy noble house. He returned to his palace, and she was handed over to the managing servant. But when she ran in, she was stopped and pulled away by the servant, but luckily he freed her. Seeing the child he brought back, the steward had to take her to get cleaned up first. She was bathed in a tub full of soap and dressed in beautiful clothes. She stayed at the palace but had no role. They hoped she would explain why he brought her there. In the original story, Canis voluntarily became a maid, even though no one asked, but she claimed she was just the master's pet dog. Because the prince said he would raise a stray dog, she didn't hesitate to call herself a pet dog. Being a puppy, she had to stay by her master's side, so she was quickly taken to the prince's room. Seeing a large bed next to her, she quickly lay down on it. No matter how hard she worked, she couldn't achieve what she wanted. But she would forget it because she no longer had to worry here. Although it wasn't great being a prince's slave. Since she knew his personality well, she would participate in the next game event regardless. Nothing would happen, so she would not think or do anything anymore. From now on, her motto was to live like a dog. The fate of a dog would bring luck. At this moment, the prince returned and was surprised to see a little girl lying on his bed. He asked her what she was doing there, and Eugen unhesitatingly said she was a pet dog. If she was a dog and he wanted to tame her, dogs usually stayed by their master's side, but he didn't allow dogs on his bed, so he quickly called someone to bring a kennel, which made Eugen panic and fear not knowing what was happening. In this palace there were no kennels except for the stables, so did that mean the steward had to put her in a wooden box and take her to the garden? But he said a room would suffice, so Eugen was taken to another room. She lay down that night thinking about how Prince Michael ignored Canis at the beginning of the game. However, he was kinder than she thought, and for him, the trouble would start from her. He felt sorry for the beastmen he saw in the play. Anat with black hair and black eyes was a woman of unknown identity and origin, but there was no one like her in the world, and she appeared in the middle of a marriage. The emperor of the Imperator Empire had the heart of Dietrich. When Anat appeared, the emperor already had an empress. For the emperor, the most sacred thing was the engagement promise. And the birth of princes and princesses did not matter. The scandal began when the emperor killed the empress in a fake carriage accident. Michael was entrusted to a steward to raise him properly, and every day he had to learn how to be an emperor, study ancient languages and military science. The emperor's son, Michael, was considered a genius, but the emperor still wanted him to study more to become a comprehensive emperor. The servants felt sorry for him because he had to study so much. But the emperor thought it was not enough. One day he had geometry and geography classes, and in the evening he had a session with a philosopher scheduled for the morning. In the afternoon he had military law and astronomy, and military studies included outside visits to learn tactics and horseback riding. The teachers were worried that this process would be too much even for an adult, yet Michael handled it without any problems. Everyone did not know what the prince had lost by having to devote himself to such heavy studies. He chose the strategy of wiping out an entire village when there was only one spy, as it was the most effective in war. He quickly got involved in court affairs, which was part of the agenda, and he had to take responsibility for his decisions. Seeing how he handled matters, the emperor was completely confident in entrusting him with this responsibility. To please the beautiful Anat, as his father the emperor wished, he went to adopt a beast man. From the first time they met, Michael's gaze showed a lack of respect. He didn't even know who she was. If he only expressed feelings and trust in such a disrespectful manner, he was just a master. He thought raising a dog wouldn't be a bad thing either. This morning, he enjoyed his breakfast while thinking about the dog he had just brought back. He was somewhat angry when he saw that the steward did not care much about taking care of his dog. The dog's room was the one he used as a playroom. Budget drafts related to the maid would be handled quickly. Then the steward took out a collar from the store, saying that if a slave escaped or rebelled, the collar could explode, but its intensity was too weak for him, and he would need to create a much stronger one. At this moment, she was facing his questioning because last time he had seen her pass by the royal bedroom without permission. Wandering around was very dangerous, so he had to ensure she did not leave this palace. This was a collar, and as a slave, she needed to know the rules in the royal household. How could she not know about this? This restraining room he had prepared for her was meant for the main character. She couldn't believe she liked something that could track her position. Maybe the previous main character didn't like it, but for her, it was something that ensured her safety. He was surprised that she trusted him enough to wear it without hesitation. He knew how people talked badly about him behind his back. They said he was a terrifying cold-blooded tyrant. And it wasn't wrong. So he didn't want to deny it. But he didn't understand why she would trust someone like him as her master. Did this girl not even have basic survival instincts? He thought he had to keep her in the palace, so she couldn't go to dangerous places. He created many barriers in the bedroom instead of bombs, emergency escape switches, or cold insulation. The steward didn't understand when the hare's defensive tools had become such restraints. She looked at a table full of delicious food in front of her. And the servants continued to take care of her. In the game, she and the prince were the same age, so now that the prince was 16, she would be a little younger. Maybe because she hadn't eaten well enough to grow, she didn't look her age, so everyone thought she was a child and treated her kindly, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. After eating, she felt sleepy again even though she had already slept a lot, but she didn't care and lay down anyway as she had nothing else to do. She felt that the life of a dog was truly wonderful, just eating and sleeping all week long. There was no one to talk to, and she needed to do something much more interesting. She looked outside and quickly left the palace. How long had it been since she last went outside during the day? It had been so long since she moved around that she felt a bit tired, so she went to the water pavilion to sit and rest a bit. The prince was in a meeting discussing which territory the project would be carried out on. He knew he shouldn't waste time listening to these people argue because the prisoner case was still unresolved, and he had to face a new issue. Like those nobles who only cared about their own interests, they were truly useless and incompetent. He thought he needed to reform the government apparatus, and at that moment, he walked straight to the water pavilion. Seeing her asleep in there, he knew this was his private space, and no one was allowed to enter. They thought he would be angry when he saw this. But unexpectedly, he quickly dismissed his servants. He didn't forget to tell them to bring a blanket or something soft, but not too thick to cover her. He looked at her sleeping and felt she was so carefree and resembled an adorable puppy, a puppy that fell asleep while waiting for its master. When she woke up, she felt refreshed in the morning without the repetitive work and pressure anymore, no more damned weekly reports, so the morning was truly refreshing. She wondered where she should explore today and decided to go out to the garden again. Unexpectedly, she saw a horse with a flowing mane and exclaimed that it was truly perfect. She fed it some apples and noticed a boy standing behind the barn door, watching her secretly. The boy thought she was a horse thief sneaking in and stood there on guard. But truly, no thief could be this incompetent to sneak in like that. This boy was Hans, and he was learning how to manage the stables from his uncle Bernard. For the first time, she saw someone in the palace who didn't notice the restraining collar she wore around her neck. There was no need to tell a kid that she was actually a slave. She felt lucky to have found a good master and was now enjoying the life of a royal pet dog. She didn't think she needed to explain the details, so she just introduced her name. The boy then led her inside to tell her the names of the horses, marking the start of another new adventure. The master's territory was also her territory. When were pets ever allowed to decide whether they could enter a room or not? She had decided, so she went to the prince's study to have a snack. She thought that if they didn't want the dog to come in, they should have closed the door. Naturally, a normal dog opening a closed door was hard to avoid. She didn't think she liked sweets, but his study was always full of snacks. Anyway, it was best to eat them before they went stale. The servants came in and saw her happily eating, reminding each other not to leave the dog's food out before going back out. She ate her fill in the study and then started thinking about where to go today. She felt very tired from exploring and gradually grew bored, so she naturally missed her phone and wanted to play games. Before she had a phone, she didn't understand what everyone played, so she took the liberty to ask a passing servant. Fortunately, when she stepped into the library, all the books were in Korean. Of course, this was a Korean game. Sometimes she felt a bit strange because although their faces were not Korean, they spoke in Korean, especially the prince, and she couldn't help but feel embarrassed when she thought about how handsome he was. At this moment, she turned around and saw the prince sleeping on a chair. He looked quite tired that day. He hadn't become a father yet but was already shouldering great responsibilities. Although he seemed mature, he was still quite young. She thought he was having a nightmare as he whimpered softly. And she didn't know if she should wake him up. She didn't know where her limits were, but as a pet, she didn't need to worry about such things. This was the moment in the game when the prince would be comforted, and she was surprised that her body temperature kept her close. However, this didn't mean she wanted to comfort him. She just sat beside him because it would soothe him more. If this could dispel his nightmares, it was just a strange coincidence. She unknowingly fell asleep, and her head rested on his shoulder, waking him up. Not only that, she instinctively wrapped her arms around him and gave him a warm hug, making contented sounds. She unconsciously murmured that this place was warm, and he gently patted her head with affection. She had a nightmare about having to go to work and waking up at 7 o'clock am because of the annoying alarm clock. She tried to wake up, but to her surprise, he was right in front of her. His eyes were close to hers, and she angrily asked herself what the heck was going on. She didn't understand why she was lying on the prince's lap, and the scene was extremely ambiguous. He wanted to reach out to pat her head to comfort her, but she refused. His face showed a bit of sadness, which made her feel slightly guilty. She knew she had taken advantage of his kindness, but sometimes he should enjoy the privileges of raising a pet. She found the feeling very pleasant and was getting sleepy, but she remembered she had something to ask. Despite this, his gentleness made her fall asleep again, and he was very satisfied with this. The next day arrived, and she was of age to ride her horse, Tinker Bell, around the garden. She had done well by asking him instead of sleeping. There was a beautiful brown horse in the stable she also wanted to ride, and he agreed. Words were important, even if everything else wasn't. When approaching someone else's pet, you must first ask their guardian. She nodded, satisfied with this, and couldn't help but smile, knowing she had done the right thing. After taking the horse back and kissing it goodbye, even though she wanted to ride more, her legs were incredibly sore. As she passed the stable, she saw a hammock and a wooden swing. She planned to set up the hammock in her hiding spot and take a nap. She went to his water pavilion but couldn't understand why her shoe kept slipping off, even though she had tied it many times. Even after switching to a different tree, it was the same. So she decided to abandon the hammock and set up the swing instead. She saw a high branch and thought hanging the swing there would be perfect. But she didn't know that he had slowly approached and saw the items scattered on the ground. The steward predicted that someone was trying to hang the hammock and swing on the tree. Without a ladder, it would be difficult to tie it with such a long rope. Unexpectedly, he looked up at the tree and ordered his soldiers to cut it down immediately. When she returned and saw the tree had been chopped down, she was very shocked. She didn't understand what had happened, and was on the verge of tears. She remembered that there was a dense ancient forest in front of her, but now she felt strangely unfamiliar. Looking again, she saw it was a playground he had created for her, with some items even gilded. On the table were her favorite snacks, adorable sweets. This touched her heart, and she felt the place was wonderful. The pet benefits were excellent, and this became her favorite spot. She was very surprised when she first saw these picture books in the study. The picture book opened up to reveal many magical illustrations, with scenes that floated like a real animation. The author was truly a genius, so she quickly ran inside to get another look. But when she ran past a room, she saw puppets inside. This was the first time she had seen this place and realized there were still many areas she hadn't explored. These are commemorative victory paintings, and they look very simple, depicting beast men who were not victorious yet portrayed larger. She pushed the door open and saw that it was a room, but there was nothing special inside. She walked in and approached the piano, which looked very similar to the ones on Earth. Imitating a passionate pianist, she started to look around the room again. The piano and bookshelf made her remember that this was the place with the secret passage. But as she thought she was overthinking it, she opened the secret door. She was pulled deep inside, and now the entire palace was in an uproar searching for her. The royal magician was coming to find her using magic, but tracking her position yielded no results. The steward was terrified because, according to his orders, he had to watch over and protect the dog, and now this had happened. Taking care of the puppy was quite difficult as there were many unexpected preparations. First, they needed to know what snacks she liked to eat and where she was to bring food to her. If she fell asleep somewhere, they would have to go there to bring her back, and the prince himself would ensure she returned safely to her warm bed. Wandering leisurely, the puppy always showed a calm face. He remembered her figure and vowed to find her soon. The magical function embedded in the collar was meant for such situations. The magician had arrived, and the device on her collar wasn't responding, which made him extremely angry. More precisely, she was reacting, but it was blocked somewhere and couldn't send the position, as if it was being magically interfered with. Normally such cases could indicate kidnapping, and he was furious because he had hired a high-priced magician from the other world. He dared to see who had the guts to do such a thing, so he immediately ordered all the soldiers to come here to find her. Whoever dared to do this behind his back, if he caught them he would tear them into 12 pieces. She looked around in fear, feeling that there wasn't a hint of light. This place was indeed dark, and she realized there was something soft. Was it a glowing stone, or did it start glowing because she touched it? It seemed to work like a hot pack, but she had no idea where she was. She couldn't even see an escape device, but she was still the prince's pet. If she disappeared, surely someone would come to find her, right? For now, she decided to wait. People often said that if you become a lost child, staying in one place would reduce the chances of being found. She didn't understand why it kept getting darker. Was it because the more she used the stone, the dimmer it got? This was not good because if even this light disappeared, she wouldn't be able to see what was ahead. First, she decided to move, thinking that a secret passage meant for escape must lead to a safe place. She thought everything would be okay, she just had to keep going and endure a bit more to see the outcome. Suddenly, she saw the exit, and to her surprise, there was a cat in front of her. She couldn't believe it was a tiger cub, which circled around her non-stop. This was Koen as a young cub, appearing in the game in his adult form. He didn't have a major role in the game, but because he was a primary illustration, he was very detailed. Was it the producer's personal intention to describe each strand of his fur so meticulously? Thinking about it, if this tiger was here, this must be Princess Raffles' palace. In the game, she was just a supporting character who appeared occasionally, and it was unclear whether she was an ally or an obstacle. She curiously looked at the cosmetics on the table, but they were actually chemical experiment materials. Next to them was a stack of documents, and unexpectedly, the princess appeared behind her. The stack of documents contained the songs of the Blue Sea, and the princess was its author. She excitedly shared her feelings about reading that work, and the two enjoyed cakes together on the couch. She couldn't believe that the girl who appeared midway would play such a role, and that even in a dream, it would become a premonition.